I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about flexible work, and I'm actually going to break the presentation into about 4 sections. Talk a little bit about WorkShift and who we are, so you have some sense of why I'm here talking about this. And then I'll talk about municipalities and flexible work as a promotion, the benefit of having it understood by the businesses in your community, a little bit about it from an internal perspective and how municipalities are using it internally. And then a last little bit, I'm going to go through some of the steps that we've identified in what we call the WorkShift playbook. And it's essentially 10 steps to take you from building the business case through to implementation of a flexible work program. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask. If you're wondering, I do always travel with my own personal paparazzi, just to keep things interesting. I'm from Toronto, you know, we like to be the center of the attention. Then I want to thank Shaw. So Shaw is the presenter for today. Shaw is one of our corporate sponsors. WorkShift, who we are, we're a not-for-profit that was founded in Calgary about 8 years ago. And what flexible work is, I'll start there. So flexible work goes by many names, or there are many terms that float around out there. We like the term work shifting, obviously, but virtualization, telework, peak shifting, e-commuting, all of these things have come and floated around for a few years. And the one thing that matters in all of them is that work is at the center of it. So this isn't something about, it's not just for HR or for keeping people happy. It's really centered on productivity and work. And it has a number of side benefits that I'll go through. So as I started to say, we are a Canadian not-for-profit. We help organizations and communities understand and adopt flexible work. So we were born 8 years ago in the city of Calgary. At the time, Calgary was in a slightly different position than they are currently. At the time, they were growing really quickly. There was a war for talent. There was a shortage of office space, and there was a lot of commuting and gridlock. And Transportation Demand Management had done some math and figured out if we can get 3% of cars off the road at peak hours, we can eliminate gridlock. So WorkShift was born as an economic development program within Calgary, and the goal was really to get people to just shift their days a little bit and try and minimize the impact on the infrastructure in the city to help increase productivity. Eventually, it was successful enough that other communities started calling, and WorkShift became a not-for-profit that was spun out into a national organization. And in order to fund that, our goal is to help Canadians lead the way in adopting flexible work. And so we've partnered with organizations like Shaw to help us provide the funding, but also the expertise in areas of technology, KPMG for people in change management. And we work with governments across the country, and I'll talk about some of those a little bit. And really, we're trying to help Canada lead the way. In terms of what flexible work is, so from our perspective, our definition is a management culture in which employees are empowered to work when and where they're most effective, with a focus on results rather than presenteeism. And the important part there is that it's really evolved over the 8 years. So it used to be a little bit about just shifting your day, and there's a greater focus on working from home. And really, we don't look at it that way. Both of those things play a part in what we see as flexible work. But at the end of the day, it's really about results and allowing people to work when and where they're most effective. The other thing that WorkShift is we're trying to do for the workforce what LEED did for buildings. And when I say that, it's a little bit of a look into our future. And what we're doing there is, if you look at an organization today and they say they have flexible work, in some cases it's true. In other cases, it's a little bit of just saying it so that people will want to work there. But when you actually arrive, there's a bit of a cultural taboo, or manager X doesn't really agree with it, so he wants everybody in his team to be in their seats. So what we've tried to do is identify some criteria that we've identified that make up a certification criteria. And we'll be rolling those out for organizations so that as a job seeker, you can go and find an organization that you can be confident actually has taken the time to think through what flexible work is and what to put the policies and tools in place. So what we do as an organization, sort of 3 fundamental things. We do research. So I'll talk a little about some of the research we did last year and tease some of the research we have coming out shortly. We work with employers to directly help them with implementation, both public sector with municipalities and private sector organizations. That's changed a little bit over the time. Initially, we were an advocacy organization. Our role was to help educate people on the benefits of flexible work and why they should be thinking about it. And gradually, I like to say we've been successful because people have stopped asking why, or they still ask why, but not as much. but increasingly we're asked how. And so for that, we've developed something called the WorkShift Playbook that I'll talk about a little bit later. And we also work with municipalities. As I said, we were originally born in Calgary, and we started getting, we had a federal grant along with matching funds from the Calgary Economic Development. But as that program was running, we started getting phone calls from other communities across Canada and actually around the world saying, we like what you're doing here. We'd like to do something similar. Can you come and help with us? So on that basis, we started partnering with other municipalities. So where we fit into things, we are a little odd because we're not-for-profit. Often people find it strange that we are. It's just the nature of where we came from and the fact that we're really just trying to drive the change within Canada. We're still incubated within Calgary Economic Development. We work with, as I said, government, employers, and then we help support employees. So really try and be the middle ground between those things. And we're also not necessarily the answer for everything. We work with a number of organizations like Shaw to try and ensure that we connect people to the right expertise when they need it, rather than us trying to maximize hours on site as an organization. So WorkShift is also, this is the last time I'll use this structure, I promise, a business-friendly, environmentally responsible strategy that promotes employee productivity, reduces unnecessary commutes, and strain on public infrastructure. So as I said, that was really where we were born. And the reason that that's beneficial for municipalities and organizations or other government agencies is that they're looking to attract the right talent to their communities. So having a business community that is fully adopted or accepted this can help bring talent to the community. And in Calgary's case, we've taken the same thinking that allowed WorkShift to be born and turned it on its head a little bit given the current economic situation in Calgary, where there's a desire to retain talent within Calgary. So what's being called the Talent Hub is pairing workers within Calgary with organizations located elsewhere so that talent can remain employed, but they stay within Calgary so that as things pick back up, as they inevitably will, the talent is still there for the Calgary economy. And they're able to use the empty office space as things have shifted to house those people. So there's new programs going in. From a broader society perspective, there's a congestion element. If you've got fewer people commuting at peak hours, you're able to minimize the impact from an environmental perspective. Improve livability. So again, if you've got people who aren't stuck in Vancouver or Toronto or wherever you happen to be in gridlock all the time, then you've got a happier populace. Reduce stress on infrastructure, same idea, and then reduce CO2 emissions. And disaster preparedness is one that people don't often think about. So a couple examples of those things. This is Mary Morin, she's the head of Calgary Economic Development. So the reason Calgary Economic Development continues to support WorkShift is that it helps the city position itself from a trade perspective as a progressive and innovative city that's adjusting to workplace demands. So really, it's been something that we've been able to position. Several organizations have moved to the city of Calgary, and we've been able to directly link that to our support of WorkShift, or to the city's support of WorkShift. A local example of the economic or the environmental benefits is the BC government. They've calculated that they've been able to remove the equivalent of just over 1,000 vehicles off the road on an annual basis by implementing flexible work within the organization. That's Rob McDonald from the Workplace Strategies, who was at one of our conferences last year. And really, that's an amazing impact just by changing the way that you approach work. The disaster preparedness is one that people don't necessarily think about. It's an obvious one when you do think about it. If you've got something that prevents people from getting to their workplace, but you've already put in place the measures to allow them to work wherever, the fact that they can't get to their office is much more easily managed if you've done that in advance. So the city of Calgary found that when they had the big floods a couple of years ago, where a lot of the downtown core was shut down for a little while. The city was able to adapt really quickly because they have a flexible work policy internally. And they basically didn't miss a beat because they had those systems in place where they were able to just continue to work from wherever they were. I mentioned some of the cities that we work with. So currently we work with Ottawa, Calgary, obviously we were born. We continue to work with Halifax. Often when a municipality partners with us, the driving force is a transportation demand management question. So in the case of Ottawa, they're building an LRT. Halifax was doing work on one of their bridges. So they know they're going to cause pain for the people and the citizens and the businesses in their community. So promoting and having people understand the benefits of flexible work is a way to mitigate the impact that they'll feel. Metrolinx was a smaller program. We worked with them in the run-up to the Pan Am Games in Toronto last year, given the expectation that there would be commuter chaos when the games were going on, which didn't materialize, in part because people were taking the time to work flexibly. Same thing around G20 was a big motive. In the City of Edmonton, we're working with them in a slightly different manner. So they are not necessarily promoting it to their citizens, they're doing it internally first. So they're going through a major workplace transformation as they go into some new office space, and they've been using the WorkShift playbook as a means of guiding that transformation. One of the things that's been great is we've had really good, I don't expect you to be able to read this, especially me standing in front of it, but we've had really good support from mayors and the political support in each of the communities that we've gone into, because really it's something that we're trying to do to benefit citizens. So I'll talk a little bit about employer benefits. So if you're looking at it from an internal perspective, there are 5 core reasons why people come and see us or they start to look at flexible work. One of the biggest ones is real estate optimization. Anytime collaboration, the ability to attract, develop, and retain and engage your talent, employee productivity, and well-being at work. And I'll talk about those a little bit in more detail. So this is not a surprising statistic to most people, but while in the office, people spend less than 50% of their workday at their desk. It's not hard to understand. You're at meetings. Herman Miller has some research that says for a private office, it's around 80%. So from a real estate perspective, why are you paying for all of this space that sits empty for the majority of the time? There's a big opportunity to optimize that space and redesign the way it's set up. Often it's tied to activity-based design. So you've got spaces that are for quiet focused work, spaces that are more collaborative, spaces that allow for that ad hoc collision. And so there's an opportunity for increased innovation and productivity that way. And really, instead of assigning people a little defined space, a cubicle that they get to have every day, you give them the flexibility to really work wherever they need to be. Employee engagement, I'm going to talk a little bit about some research we did last year that looked at the link between flexibility, technology, and employee engagement. But before I do that, just to sort of outline how we defined or how we went and looked at employee engagement. What employees are really looking for is not, engagement isn't an in or out thing anymore. It used to be that either employees were engaged or they were not. We've tried to look at it much more on a scale. And what people are looking for is to be empowered. Everybody wants to know that they're having an impact at work, that what they're doing has some impact. They want to be motivated to contribute, so they don't want to just be there for the sake of it. People who are engaged are likely to recommend their workplace to others. They want opportunities for growth, and that might be career growth. There are those who want to rise within the ranks, and there are others who just want to learn and improve their skills. And then they want to be connected to the team at work. So the connected to the team at work is interesting because you would think that that means allowing people the flexibility to move around would have a negative impact on employee engagement, but it's actually quite the opposite. So when we looked at a baseline of Canadian employees and where people fall, it's not too bad. I mean, there's about, again, forgive the math in this slide. It says 66. It's actually 65% of Canadians are engaged at work, but there's a big area for improvement. So in terms of flexibility within offices these days, when we looked at it with Canadians, about 53% of people reported that they had the opportunity to work flexibly by time. We looked at it from 2 perspectives, both time and location. And then 31% have no option. There are those who do or do not. And then the portion of the time, about 41% of the time is spent with shifted hours. So it's happening to a little degree. When we looked at the impact of that on employee engagement, what we found was that the positive engagement group is 23% higher amongst those who have the ability to work flexibly by time. And just as importantly, those who do not have, that number decreases. So you're able to have a pretty strong impact on how engaged your employees are just by giving them the opportunity to work, to shift their hours. If you look at it by time, slightly fewer people are able to do this today, about 46%. But the impact that you can have by giving people the opportunity is massive. So you have an 89% increase in that engaged and highly engaged group just by giving people the opportunity to work flexibly by location. So if you start to combine those 2 options, the opportunity to have an impact is even greater. And just as importantly, it cuts the level of those who are the low engaged and not engaged in half. This is probably the least shocking slide you'll ever see in the sense that nobody wants less flexibility. Everybody has a desire to have some more flexibility, some more control over their lives. And one of the things that came out of this research that we looked at this year, and is a surprise to people, is that when we looked at the data, one of the things that stood out to us was that it wasn't millennials who were driving this. This isn't a young person's game where millennials are, as the media often portrays, coming along and they're changing everything and everybody's having to adapt. The desire for flexibility was true across the board. There was no difference. If anything, Gen X was a little more different from the boomers and millennials, but in general, there was no major difference. So the research we've just completed and we'll be releasing a little bit later looks at this more explicitly to say if it's not age that determines how people look at work, are there other workplace attitudes and other elements that we can look at that will have a greater impact and allow us to better segment the talent? So we'll be releasing that in about a month. The element of technology, and there's a bunch of different questions that we asked to get around technology, but the key is that those who are highly engaged tended to agree with the fact that the organizations that they work for give them the technology that they need to get their job done, the technology that allows them to stay connected, and the latest technology. So those who are looking, if you have employees or others who are looking at are the ones who are asking for new technology, it doesn't mean they're just asking because they want new shiny toys. Often they have the potential to be your most engaged employees. They just want the tools that allow them to work effectively. So productivity is another question. So this one's tricky. Everybody says, what's the impact of productivity of flexible work? Now, the first question is, or the first answer is that, how are you measuring productivity today? Most organizations currently aren't measuring productivity, so it's really hard for us to say whether it increases or decreases. But we have looked at it a couple different ways. One is that when we asked people, what time of day are you most productive? 53% of people said they were most productive outside of traditional 9 to 5 hours. So if you're thinking about requiring people to come to the office every day from 9 to 5 and expect them to work in their assigned cubicle from those set hours, you're missing out on the opportunity to have them at their most productive. And most people would happily give you that time. I think they're sort of things you learn in school, that you are somebody who does their homework late at night or something like that. And being forced to do it, personally, 2 o'clock is not my most productive time. Oddly, the session's at 2 o'clock, so hopefully that doesn't show. Be much better if it was early in the morning or late at night. But allowing people that freedom to work when they're most productive, they will choose to do that. And there's really no need for them to be stuck in the office at that exact time. When we went out and we did some research with Shaw in a white paper that we released earlier this year, 65% of Canadian businesses that offer flexible or remote work reported an increase in productivity. So that's self-reported. It's not a hard measured number that we can say, productivity unit A, X went from A to B, but at least there's a perception of improved productivity. And there's also the benefit of cost savings. So when you do all these things, there are lots of engagement and HR reasons why this is beneficial, but there's also some hard cost savings. We put together a paper a couple years ago called The Bottom Line, and we looked at the savings for both employers to employees and the community. And the annual employer savings added up to around $10,000. And I can share the paper with you if you're looking for the numbers to build that, to break that down. But it comes down to productivity, an estimate of productivity, reduced absenteeism, real estate savings, and then a continuity of operations and reduced turnover. If you've got more engaged employees who are working when they're most productive, you're able to use less real estate space and keep people, people can stay home and work when they're sick, so they're not getting other people sick. There's a lot of benefits that start to add up really quickly. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit how. If you're looking at an internal implementation and what does it take to actually implement flexible work, this isn't something that you can't do on your own. But what we've done is we've taken the expertise of organizations who've been through this, of our partners. We've tried to outline what are the 10 core steps that you need to go through in order to implement a flexible work program. So we've broken that down into 10 easy to follow steps. So the first step is building a business case. If you want to go through and implement a flexible work program, there are going to be costs involved. You need to know why you're doing it. So the business case is your opportunity to sit down and figure out what is it that we're trying to achieve, and do we have the resources to go and do that? So is it real estate optimization? Are you looking to save or manage growth? Is it employee engagement? Is it a combination of those things? And really trying to lay that out so that you can then go ahead and get the second step, which is management buy-in. Flexible work is more than anything a cultural change. There's a technology component that has to be there for it to work, but if you don't have management buy-in to drive the cultural change that's taking place, the program won't be successful. Once you have management buy-in, the next step is a feasibility analysis. So this is taking your business case and what you've identified as your objectives. You've been given the approval by management, they're on board, and it's really trying to figure out, well, what do we need to actually do to get there? So from a technology perspective, where do we stand today? Do our employees have the internet connection that they need at home? And do they have the tools to be able to access the people and data and apps that they need to in the same way that just as securely as they would in the office? And if they don't, what do we need to do in order to get there? That's where people like Shaw can come in and help. And from an HR and facilities perspective, what do we have the policies? What do we need to do to get there? The project charter is really, once you've figured out all of those things, it's the dissolution of power from management to the project team. So basically saying, here's the budget, here's what you're going to accomplish, and giving people the power to then go and actually put together the project and get started. And then the program model is actually designing the program. So the important part here is flexible work is not the same thing to all people in all cultures. It's not the same for all roles. If you have a role that you're a receptionist and you need to physically greet people, barring moving to a robotic receptionist, which I did see last week at the American Society of Interior Designers, so it does exist. But barring that, there are many roles where you need to actually be there, so there's the opportunity for flexibility is reduced. It's not eliminated though, because there may be components of your work that you could do after hours. A friend of mine's a dental hygienist, and I like to use her as an example. She really needs to be there to clean the teeth. It's not something you can do remotely, at least not yet. But there's a bunch of paperwork that goes with it. So there's an opportunity for her to clean the teeth, but then go home and complete the paperwork after she's seen her daughter and put her to bed. So there's flexibility even where you think there may not be some opportunity for flexibility. Other roles, professional salespeople have been on the road doing this for years. It's a much more natural fit, but you need to figure out what is our version of flexible work and what are we going to define as the criteria. And then the strategy is, once you've figured out what your program model is really looking at what we see as the 3 pillars of a flexible work program: HR, real estate, and technology, and then putting together the strategy for each one of those to get from where you are today to where you need to go in order to have the program implemented. And then this is what I think is actually the most important part, is the communications and change management. So at the end of the day, it's a cultural change more than it is anything else. If you've had somebody who's built their whole working life around the idea of getting a corner office, and then you suddenly say there's no offices anymore, or there's the individual who loves to have their plants or their pictures of their kids and things like that, there's change, and people don't like change. They like to come and sort of do the same thing in some cases. You really need to take the time to sit down with them, communicate what are we doing, why are we doing it, the proverbial what's in it for them, make them understand that there are benefits to them, and help them through the process of it doesn't have to be the same for everyone. So there are lots of people, just because there's flexibility doesn't mean you have to take advantage of all of the flexibility. If you really like to sit in the same desk every day, you can just come in early and take the same desk every day. But there are others who are going to take advantage of that flexibility in a much greater way. Related to that is training, and making sure that you have a training plan in place that will help people adapt to the technologies, policies, procedures that you've put in place for flexible work. And there really are more things than you might think of. I was at another conference last week, and there was a speaker from Google who talked about a program they were piloting where they had employees come in who are presumably smart people, they work at Google, and come in and say, look, I don't know where to sit, when really they could sit anywhere. So you have to train on some pretty fundamental things, let alone new technology that you've given them to use, new policies and procedures. You really need to take time to make sure people understand what's being done, why it's been done, and how they can take advantage. Because from a technology perspective, for example, you really want people to be up and running. So if you're the IT department and you've got a new tool, as you all know, that you've rolled out, you really don't want to spend time supporting somebody remotely. You want to make sure that they understand before they go and before they're not in the office to ask for help, what to do, how to get support, how do you get support so that you're managing people uptime instead of server uptime, that kind of thing. Governance is really the taking everything you've done, you've put together this program, you've put together the strategies, you've gone through, you've implemented it, all of these great things have happened, but you don't want it to be a flash in the pan. To really see the benefits of flexible work, you want to be able to ensure that there's some longevity in the program. There isn't going to be a leadership change that just wipes it out on a whim, but you really take the time to embed the change that you've made into the culture of the organization through governance, through policies, through things like your onboarding. So when somebody new joins, do they understand that this is an option, that here's what it means, here's how they do that? Oftentimes an organization will say they have a flexible work policy, but it's buried in the bowels of HR somewhere, and nobody knows how to get it or what to do or how to request, and managers certainly don't know how to approve. Because middle managers are often the biggest obstacle. Those who have been good at doing something and have been promoted into a role that is a totally different role, managing people from the thing that they were doing. And if they're not prepared for that, and they haven't been educated on how to manage to results rather than presenteeism, then that's where you start to get some pushback. And then the last thing is measurement. So again, depending on what you've set out as your objective at the beginning, you really need to think through, well, how are we going to measure success? If it was employee engagement, do you have an employee engagement survey you're doing beforehand? If it's real estate optimization, that's probably pretty easy. Do you have fewer floors, fewer square feet, whatever it is? If it's other savings, really, how are you measuring those things? But also taking the time to look for opportunities to continue to improve, and recognition that the improvement won't happen overnight. Because there is that change and people have struggled with that occasionally. I was speaking with someone from AstraZeneca who said that they found that for them, anytime they did this in a new office, it was a 90-day period. For the first, people were really reluctant going into it. The change would happen, there was some hesitancy, but after 90 days, nobody wanted to go back. So they've kind of found that to be their standard, but it's going to be different for any organization, and recognizing that there's going to be some change. The last thing, so what these all are is they're part of our WorkShift playbook. So we've outlined all of these along with documents and policy support to help somebody implement a program without having to go and write it for yourself. It goes through each of the 10 steps, identified what the step is, what the desired outcome is, what documents are there to support you, and who within an organization should be doing it. Here's the portion that is relevant to somebody in IT. They can take that part away and go do that with some sense of faith that they're going to do the right parts. This part's for HR real estate, so making sure that everybody's got a clearly identified plan. And that's all I have for now. Thank you very much.